Welcome to Afterlives of Ancient Egypt, in which we discuss ancient history and relevant current events. I'm Kara Cooney, and I love to take deep dives into history that are not always possible in academic formats. So let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Afterlives of Ancient Egypt. I am your host, Kara Cooney, and I am joined by my trusty sidekick, Amber Myers, and we are going to get going with a really interesting discussion about honor and the death of Cleopatra. So we have to set up this discussion, and I think the first place to go would be a really basic understanding of the end of Cleopatra, because this is about her death. And so let's start with that. But first, let's let Amber say hi, and we'll jump on in. How are you doing, Amber?
I'm good. I'm very curious to see how this discussion is going to turn out. I think it's going to be really interesting, but I think there are going to be some curves on the road.
Well, because we never know where these things go. So we come up with the scaffolding, and then it's like, oh, I haven't thought of that before, and we come up with it through the discussion. So
yes.
Dear listeners, listen to us think as we work through this. But I think the history of Cleopatra, the broad strokes of the history of Cleopatra, are well known to everyone. She is, as I always say, the female leader whose name, if you mentioned it at a bus stop, would be known by all, and all people would know the name of Cleopatra. They might not know the name of Hatshepsut. Nefertiti's a close second, but she might be remembered as a beauty, not as a ruler. Cleopatra, with all of the stage plays and mini series and films made about her, all the novels written about her, is very well known. She is the cautionary tale we continue to tell about women and power and what happens to them when they seize that power in a way that is considered inappropriate. And I've made this point that we retell this story because she failed, and that's why we're so attracted to it. But how about we go through a little history? What do you think?
Yeah. This is a good place to start. And I want to also say I think the story survives because Roman propaganda is very attractive.
Yeah. And the
Yeah.
story survives in a way that you have to completely unravel. You have no idea where the truth is. You know that it's not necessarily what's being told to you by Octavian. It's not necessarily what's being declared by Cleopatra and Antony themselves, sometimes separately, sometimes together. It's hard. It's hard to piece out how this works. But so, I just went through a couple of history books and piece together some basic things. But if we start at the 2nd of September, 31 BCE, we have the Battle of Actium, which, of course, Antony and Cleopatra, but really Antony, she's there with him. They lost. And you think, oh, well, then she dies right after that. But things take a little while. We have at least a year before things really devolve into her death, which is, of course, presented as a suicide, which, of course, I'm going to mess with here. But we have a whole bunch of things that happen. So she makes her son as one of the Ephebi on September 30, later September in 31 BCE. This has been interpreted as her positioning Caesarion, or Ptolemy the 15th, as he would be known in his Egyptian form, as the future sole leader of Egypt after her death. There's all this letter writing then after that between Octavian, who finds himself with his naval forces on the island of Rhodes, between Marcus Antonius and Cleopatra. Apparently he only writes back to Cleopatra. Whether that's true or not, we don't know. And then we start to get a lot of the propaganda about Cleopatra holing up in her mausoleum or with vast amounts of her treasure and threatening to burn herself, right? What do you think of these stories, Amber?
I think they make for great storytelling. It sounds very dramatic. It sounds very
Orientalizing, yeah.
exactly
Yeah.
orientalizing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you conjure immediately those 19th century paintings
Mhm.
of Antony and Cleopatra and their ultimate demise. So, yeah, compelling storytelling.
And I want to bring up here that, she's writing these letters and threatening these things. This brings up for us right off the bat this idea of money, of a debt that needs to be paid or money that is owed. That the drama that ensues is, oh my God, she's going to take herself out with all of her stuff, right? So the worry on the Roman side of things is very much about the treasure. It's very much about the materials, and her being able to remove all of these materials is something, oh, we have to act. This is something we absolutely need to do. So, and I've thought about this a lot, this idea of her, these stories, these propagandistic Roman stories of her surrounding herself in some sort of weird orientalizing depiction of a mausoleum type space, this notion of, the ancient um, savage who surrounds themselves with treasures they themselves cannot understand the value of, and are willing to destroy them just because. And 100 years later, we're going to have, I can't remember which scholar it is or which source it is, but the earring of the pearl earring that is dissolved in vinegar to win a bet, right? That kind of fast and loose treatment of precious goods, it allows the Romans to come in and say, you don't know what you have. You're not able to deal with it responsibly. And so we need to step in. So that it's kind of a setup in a sense.
And isn't it also Egypt had legitimate wealth that the Romans were interested in, and they, I can imagine, were concerned or worried that she was going to shave some value off of their acquisition, because
Mm-hmm.
they were
Mm-hmm.
looking to take over.
And indeed, Cleopatra's whole reign in Egypt starts out on the back foot within debt. So she is in debt to Rome. Her father, Ptolemy the 12th, has had Cyprus taken away from him because of the great debts that he owes to Rome. She's had to raise money. She's been expected to pay for certain military campaigns for the triumvirate when it suits Octavian and company, Mark Antony too. So there is this debt that is hanging over Egypt and Cleopatra the seventh in particular. And this idea that she owes something to her protectors, it's so mafia like to me that she has to somehow pay them off so that she can maintain her position as head of household, position of as ruler of Egypt. So the idea of her taking that debt and not paying it with the removal of herself, with in that threat that she's apparently or supposedly written to Octavian, is very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So then we have um, Octavian sends his diplomat Thyrsos because she's threatening to burn herself in the vast amounts of treasure. And then we have more fighting. So in 30 BC, a year after, we have more fighting with different Roman contingents, and Mark Antony, and he loses in 30 BC. He has a little bit of a win later on, but it doesn't really matter. The 1st of August, 30 BC, we have a Julian calendar, so we can date these things with months and everything. Of course, August, I don't think exists yet, so I'm not sure exactly how we have the exact months, but we're going to go with it. 1st of August, 30 BC, the naval fleet of Marcus Antonius is formally surrendered to Octavian, and then he surrenders his cavalry. And it's this point that we get this Romeo and Juliet type story where we're told that Cleopatra is hiding herself in her mausoleum with her attendants, and then she has a message sent that she's killed herself, and then he freaks out and is in great despair, and then he stabs himself, and then they bring him to her, and she sees him in his last dying breaths. It's so Romeo and Juliet, right? And then she's like, oh, this is horrible, and then she then dies as well. But him killing himself is the honorable way to die for a Roman soldier. What do you think of that.
My question is exactly why is Antony killing himself? Is it this Roman concept of honor? Is it the devastation of thinking that Cleopatra is gone? What's his actual motivation? So you're pointing to the Roman concept of honor. He has lost and he just needs to take himself off the board completely.
Yeah, it's an interesting patriarchal device. And we're going to get into the details of this and try to parse it out a little bit more carefully using David Graeber's book on debt. But it's an interesting patriarchal device, this honor, in which you remove yourself. If you, as you say, take yourself off the board completely, if you've lost the game of hoarding more power, taking more power. If you've lost completely, then you just eliminate yourself, and that's considered a removal of your debt in a sense. Graeber would tell us. We'll get more into that, but it's just interesting to think of this idea of honor and how Antony fulfills that according to the
Well,
story.
but it also helped Octavian too, right? Because then Octavian doesn't have to look like the bad guy who took Antony out himself.
Yeah, yeah. So it gives a it's an honorable thing to do because you don't make your opponent do it. You do it to yourself. That's what you're saying. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Hmm. Okay. Um, so then we learn that Cleopatra is able to bury Antony. There's all kinds of weird discussions about this mausoleum or tomb or how it works. Um, Discussions about being a high up place you can only reach with a ladder. I have no idea what this would look like. But she's apparently holed up in this place and not allowing anyone to come in except for her own attendants. And Octavian then enters Alexandria. He's accepted the defeat of Marcus Antonius. He's now occupying the place. He's occupying the palace. He's occupying Alexandria. He's taking Egypt as a province of Rome. This is the first time that Egypt will be thus taken. But he has still to deal with Cleopatra. Cleopatra's got her own body and self, and then she has many children, right? She has 4 children. She has 3 with Mark Antony, and she has Caesarion, otherwise known as Ptolemy the 15th. It seems that she sends Ptolemy the 15th down to Upper Egypt. That's its own story. We won't be touching upon that here. He's hunted down and killed from what we can understand. And then the other children, the daughters survive, the other son is killed. But there seems to be dealings between Octavian and Cleopatra about what will happen to her children. And it does not seem that he is truly honorable in how this, from my perspective as a historian, not the way the Romans are presenting it, but it doesn't seem he's truly honorable in following through on his word, right?
Oh,
Um,
yeah, of course not. Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, because I'm also thinking this idea of Cleopatra being holed up somewhere. Like, of course she is. She's like Putin on Zoom with all of his people. He doesn't want to be around anybody, right? Because there's potential threats everywhere. And
right,
also being around in the Ptolemaic period, growing up as she did, I'm assuming that she realizes if she is not completely secure physically, somebody at some point is going to take her out.
right, right. And so she's trying to secure the lives of her children, and lesser, she's trying to secure the life of herself potentially, maybe not. But we start to get this discussion of, and apparently we have a direct quote from Livy where she says, "I will not be led in a triumph." So that's something that the Romans are presenting as a motivating factor for her as she looks forward to her last days, that she will not be led in a triumph.
That part I could buy. She doesn't want to be dragged back to Rome and paraded down the streets in this ultimate public humiliation, not just for her, but for Egypt. Yeah, I could buy that as a thought that she might have for sure.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And one could imagine that when there are triumphs, when there were triumphs in Rome, and a state leader, a tribal leader from Britain or a state leader from Syria or whatever was paraded through the streets of Rome in chains, I imagine that the men steeped in patriarchy and notions of honor thought, wow, that man wasn't able to kill himself first, and here he is. He is now degraded and meant to be paraded for our consumption, right? For our enjoyment. But the way out of that would have been to kill oneself, I suppose. So
Yeah,
so
for sure.
these,
Well,
yeah,
and for a woman to be put in that kind of position, who knows what they might have done to her.
yeah,
Because
yeah.
having a man led in a triumph like that in defeat is one thing, but for it to be a woman, I mean, who
Hmm.
knows what
But
she might
see
have
that
experienced.
this is where it gets interesting, because within a patriarchal society, to do such things to a woman then can bring dishonor to a man. To degrade a woman like Cleopatra in public can create martyrdom, can create public sympathy, can because everyone knows that the patriarch is more powerful than the matriarch, that the man is more powerful than the woman in a patriarchal society, that the sexual dimorphism of the male body is more powerful than the female. And if that punishment is meted out in public, it could easily backfire. So
Agreed, agreed
yeah.
for the rulers, but what if it's a oops, you're in public and look at these masses, they overpowered the guards or whatever. No,
But
like you
then
put
you
it off
put,
on someone else.
yes, but if you allow that situation to happen, then people are like, oh, they set her up, they allowed this to happen, this is horrible. It would have, it
So
would not
you're
have.
saying Octavian would have kept it under wraps, like it would have been controlled.
I don't think a her sister was walked in triumph, and there is a living memory of her sister being walked in triumph in Rome, and I don't think it worked out well. I think it created more public sympathy. I don't think this is discussed openly in the records, or by the propagandists, but I think this is the kind of thing that they're thinking about strategically. This will not necessarily work out well for them, but it is presented in the propaganda after the fact as she doesn't want to be walked in Rome in triumph because her sister had been. But really, remember how we say today when we're dealing with propaganda on the daily that every accusation is an admission. Every accusation is a projection. So when you accuse somebody of child sex abuse, you may be the one who's actually perpetrated it, right? So we have the Trump Epstein situation, and they're saying, oh, all these people committed child sex abuse, when it turns out they're the ones who actually did it. So in short, I'm saying that when the propagandists are saying, oh, Cleopatra doesn't want to be walked in a triumph and she's going to kill herself before being walked in a triumph, this is the projection of what they fear. They fear walking her in a triumph, and they fear the perspective that that will create amongst their own people. And thus this idea of suicide and honor or death removal is brought into it, but in a different kind of way. I find it extraordinary that people
Yeah,
haven't
yeah.
pieced this together and they
This
haven't
is
unraveled this propaganda, but here we are.
this is an interesting thing to think about because you can imagine Octavian and his advisors sitting around like, okay, we need to get rid of her
Mm-hmm.
potentially. How do we
Mm-hmm.
do it? And
Right.
as you say, how do we do it and preserve this sense of honor that we're
Mm-hmm.
so concerned about?
Right. Right. Stay clean. They have to stay clean. And Octavian, soon to be Augustus, is all about staying clean, right? He's got his wife set up as one of the most honored. She gets a statue in the forum. I mean, and the erstwhile wife, Octavia, of his sister, of Mark Antony, she also gets a statue, but they're presented as these pious, pristine women who are untouchable. That's what he's going for. That's the ideological power of his regime. None of this like um I can sleep with as many women as I want kind of imperial strategy that we'll see later, or that we might have seen earlier among certain senators. This isn't the kind of image that he wants to present. He wants to present a very clean, tidy persona.
And that's an interesting point. So helps to clean up his record a little bit before he goes full Augustus.
And let's just be very frank with our listeners here, and for those of you who've read my book, When Women Ruled the World, I dispute the notion that Cleopatra killed herself. No, we weren't in the room where it happened. I don't believe the Romans who say they were in the room where it happened. doesn't serve Octavian to claim to have killed her, but it serves him to have her gone. And it serves his clean reputation to claim that she did it to herself. So that's where we're going with this. If you can't figure that, you haven't been able to figure that out. We are going with the idea that Cleopatra did not do herself in, but was instead done in, but that the story, the propaganda that follows, that is told to the Roman people, told to the classical world that we then inherit and retell, is a lie. But it's a lie embedded so deeply in patriarchy, the water in which we swim, that we can barely see it. And so I want to unravel it from that perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So then moving on, we are told that a spy has told Cleopatra that Octavian is going to relocate her and her children to Rome in a few days' time. And so she starts to prepare her suicide. Then we are told, and we have all kinds of stories about how she tries out. Some authors tell us how she tries out different methods of suicide, like poison on some of her enslaved people, to find out which one is less painful, which really puts her into the position of being that decadent ruler who just treats human life extraordinarily cheaply. It's a really wonderful story to present her as a selfish, just a selfish woman who doesn't want any pain, doesn't want the degradation of the triumph, doesn't want the pain of death. We already start out by taking her honor away. So if suicide is an honorable thing to do, her practicing different methods on certain men is a dishonorable thing to do. Her scheming in this way when she hears about these plans is a dishonorable thing to do in a patriarchal method. So they're really laying the foundation for this story of her being dishonorable within an honorable masculine practice of suicide.
Yeah. Okay. So this is what I'm thinking about as you're talking, because we're kind of threading the needle here, right?
Yeah.
Because suicide for Antony, honorable,
Yeah.
straight up,
Yeah.
right? Suicide for a female,
Yeah.
Cleopatra, dishonorable.
Mm-hmm.
So, and she's being dishonorable in her process of doing the dishonorable thing
Right.
by
And how she
experimenting
goes
on her
about it.
servants.
Yes.
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 Okay. Okay. So like a double whammy.
Right. And even when they present the Arsinoe the Fourth triumph, and we're told that she even thinks about that, and she's like, "Oh, I don't want to be presented in that way." Again, remember that this is also, in my opinion, a projection of the Romans. Like they have no intention of repeating that mistake in a sense. If she has no intention of being that prize within the chains of Rome. But so then we're told on the 12th of August, 30 BC, at the age of 39, she kills herself in her tomb and takes out some servants with her. Talk about decadent. Talk about the orientalizing rule of the tyrant, right? The person who's taken too much power. Not only has she taken herself out, but in the manner of that decadent primitive ruler, they've also forced others to come with them, and kind of like a sacrificial burial, like the kings of old, right?
Yeah.
So
Having
that
no
part is
value
there
for human
too.
life. Just
Mm-hmm.
take others with you.
Just take. And we all know that when you stand in front of the pyramids to this day, you will hear people saying, "Oh, he murdered his wives to accompany him," like Cheops or Khufu, right? That he murdered his wives to accompany him into the tomb. That is not true
I
for the
was
fourth dynasty,
Yeah,
but it
I was
is for the
about,
first,
but I
right?
was about to say that I bet you perhaps in the Roman mindset that there might have been that association in the Roman mind with ancient Egyptian rulers. And
Yes.
so this kind of would have played into their ideas. Oh, of course she would have done that because that's what these ancient Egyptian rulers did.
Right. And so everything is here set up to separate Octavian and his honorable ways from the Eastern ways. And then you know what, you guys, I'm not even going to go through all the different kinds of ways that she is said to have killed herself except to list them. So there's the idea that she allowed herself to be bitten by an asp or a cobra. Um, and many follow through with this. Some people think she used some sort of a spine um, to stab herself. Some people say that she used a kind of needle to inject poison. Um, One author says that she uses a poisoned cream of some kind, like an ointment. Um, so there's all kinds of discussions. We do not know, and thou doth protest too much. If we really don't know how she did it, and they're coming up with more. They're confabulating these extraordinary ways that she supposedly killed herself, one more extraordinary than the next. It seems that something else is going on. I think that she's removed, but anyway, doesn't really matter. She's dead, and now Octavian can truly take the most powerful and richest province into the Roman Empire and reopen those gold mines, get all of those minerals to Rome. He's really able to just pour that wealth and those riches into Egypt, but he has to do so with honor, right? So it's important to remember, and this is my last point in the history before we jump into all of the David Graeber stuff, is that taking Egypt is something that senators during the civil wars had been trying to do for centuries, arguably. And no one was able to do it because by pulling that power to oneself, then you effectively make yourself into a king and you destroy the Roman Republic. People are very upset and threatened by this, and it's not something that works. And we know what happens to Julius Caesar when he tries to do it. He's killed on the steps of the Senate for putting his men in Egypt, occupying that place, having a baby with the queen, and effectively creating a lineage that makes him like a king, right? So people are very upset about this and threatened so much so that they remove him. Mark Antony tries the same, and people are so upset they remove him in a military fashion, but they remove him. Now Octavian's staring down the barrel of that gun and is like, wait a minute, will the same happen to me? So he has to walk into this eyes wide open saying, I am just here to make this right. This Egypt has ruined at least two of our good Roman men, and I'm going to make sure it doesn't happen a third time. And so he must create an enemy out of Cleopatra and a profligate, sad, like a demented witch-like figure out of her so that he can come in as the savior of all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that maybe a lot of people aren't quite aware what kind of a game piece Egypt was on the board. But as you say, it was so important that for centuries it was difficult for Roman politicians to go near it without potentially endangering their political careers and perhaps their own safety.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the basic history. Obviously, there's a whole lot more to it, and a lot more detail, and names, and people, and other things, battles, and such. But we're going to keep it simple. And now let's jump into this idea of honor, which is very closely connected to debt, and we want to bring in the David Graeber. But let's start with, because suicide associated with honor, we want to really parse this out in terms of male versus female bodies and what that means. But how do we define honor?
Well, we can go to our Merriam-Webster.
What have you got, Amber? What have you got?
For definitions of honor, we have a good name or public esteem, a
Mm-hmm.
showing of usually merited respect, a person of superior standing, one whose worth brings respect or fame. Just scrolling down here a little bit. Honored or honoring as a verb, to regard or treat someone with admiration and respect, to give special recognition to live up to or fulfill the terms of, to accept as payment, and as we learned earlier, to salute with a bow in square dancing.
We're never talking about this because both of us were forced to do square dancing in PE. It's one of my least fond memories of growing up in Houston, Texas, but I remember Honor your partner, do si do. I remember
This
this.
is very
It's
true. You said that,
uh,
which completely triggered me
I know
because
it was
I hated that part of the
horrible.
PE as well.
Oh, everyone hated it. I don't know what the hell they were trying to do except get us to honor our patriarchs of the past. But oh God, it was horrible. And imagine being 6 feet tall and square dancing in the eighth grade. Like I can't think of anything worse than that. But anyway, okay, let's move that trauma to the side. and, and so I like these ideas of honor to have respect, to have a good name, and you have in there accept payment, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So, I thought let's look up some Egyptian words. There, if you do an English search for the word honor, there's nothing there. Um, However, if you look up like debt and paying off a debt, you get this word hetem with the chord, the dotted H, hetem, and you have the meaning pay off a debt. It also has a number of other meanings depending on the context, and it's a very interesting word, and it's something that one could really do an etymological and lexicographical dive into, I think, because it means to provide. That's very patriarchal, right? This idea of provision, of giving your payment. It means to settle up, to make things even and square, right? Like if you have a good name, that means you settle up. You are known for paying off your debts. You're not somebody who leaves people hanging. Um, Interestingly, it also means to destroy. Slightly different spelling, with a duck at the end, but it's not that different in its spelling. And and it has the negative arm. So to destroy an enemy, I mean, it's to settle a debt, right? So if somebody's wronged you and you need to destroy them, then you'll remove them and it creates honor for you to settle that debt. So that was really surprising and interesting. That destroy, annihilate, overwhelm, in different contexts. So yeah. And it can also be to perish or to be destroyed. So somebody who's destroyed, um, again, I would connect it to this idea of settling a debt in a sense. And yeah, so that's pretty cool. So this is our idea of honor, connecting it with suicide, connecting it with the value of a human life, right?
Yeah. So it's there's a transactional aspect to it, right? Like an evening of the transactional scales.
Yeah. Okay, so now let's jump to David Graeber. And for those of you who don't know who he was an anthropologist who died, I think, in 2020 and in his 50s, way too young, but thankfully has had produced a number of wonderful volumes. Some people hate them, some people love them. He was a known radical communist. He grew up in a commune in, I think, New York City, and did not get tenure at, I believe it's Yale, and then ended up at University College London. And his book on debt is has been very formative to me and my work on reuse, my work on how one reuses a coffin of a king with honor. How do you pay off the debt of the ancestor when you're also simultaneously taking from them? How do you give back in a ritual form? So I've used his work quite a bit. And it's an interesting segue then to think about the honorable suicide, the honorable removal of oneself from the game, and Cleopatra. So let's start with a discussion of honor as defined by David Graeber. So I think, did you pull this one up, or do I have it?
Is this page 166?
Yeah, yeah, I think I've got it.
Okay.
Okay, so head to, if you've got your David Graeber debt, just, at the ready, head to page, what page is it? Yeah, 165. Yeah, but no, I want to start at 166. Sorry. Okay, so go to your David Graeber's debt and go to page 166. And then he says the best way, and he's talking about solving a certain problem. To do so, I believe, is to start from a single, odd, vexed concept the concept of honor, which can be treated as a kind of artifact or even as a hieroglyphic, a fragment preserved from history that seems to compress into itself the answer to almost everything we've been trying to understand. On the one hand, violence, men who live by violence, whether soldiers or gangsters, are almost invariably obsessed with honor, and assaults on honor are considered the most obvious justification for acts of violence. On the other, debt. We speak both of debts of honor and honoring one's debts. In fact, the transition from one to the other provides the best clue to how debts emerge from obligations, even as the notion of honor seemed to echo a defiant insistence that financial debts are not really the most important ones. An echo here of arguments that, like those in the Vedas and the Bible, go back to the very dawn of the market itself. Even more disturbingly, since the notion of honor makes no sense without the possibility of degradation, reconstructing this history reveals how much our basic concepts of freedom and morality took shape within institutions, notably, but not only slavery, that we'd sooner not have to think about at all. So, like gazillion concepts packed into that one long paragraph. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, that was my thought exactly. He's got so much, he's got a multi-dimensional way of thinking about this concept of honor. And it actually, in some ways, reminds me of the way that Egyptologists sometimes discuss Ma'at or Isfet, things that are very difficult to actually put a solid definition to, but
Yeah.
like pornography, you know it when you see it.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, according to our American Supreme Court, that has lost its honor, very much so.
Very much
It's
so.
interesting, right? Everyone knows
Yeah.
they've lost their honor. They've just been paid off. We talk about it, but then that's its own discussion. They've become degraded.
Yeah. Well, but
Yeah.
I think that this is why this gets at, I think, what you're wanting to talk about, honor and its connection to ideology, because in many ways, ideology is more something you feel or you recognize versus strictly define, right? Because
Hmm.
it evolves and it changes depending on the situation and your ideological needs.
And it feeds into the water in which you swim such that you can't even recognize it. It's just a part of your embedded world. It's not, or the world in which you are embedded. It's not something that you can pull apart. That's why history is so very important, is you're coming at it from thousands of years later. So you can, and here we are on the cusp of an anti-patriarchal revolution. So we can look at patriarchy in a different way than you arguably could in Cleopatra's Egypt. Here we are with the privilege of being able to say, oh, look at what Octavian was doing. Look at how Cleopatra was set up. She speaks nary a word except I will not walk in triumph. If she said that or not, we don't know, but they're putting that into her mouth. That's what's being represented. But we are now having a discussion of what it even means to be honorable. And somehow she needs to pay a debt. She owes a debt, is rather what we're being told.
Yeah, and I also think that this idea of honor being difficult to pin down as far as a definition also serves patriarchal framework, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because then it can be somewhat fluid and whoever's making the calls at the time can decide what is truly honorable versus what is not.
And what's the most brutal thing that humans can do to one another? Violence, murder, the removal of a life. And if you have the ideology to support that as being honorable and necessary, then you have everything you need. You're able to move forward with your propagandistic ideology and keep clean. So the fact that he mentions hieroglyphic, I think, is amazing that that's in this. That he mentions violence. That men who live by violence are attracted and need this idea, this ephemeris idea of honor, right? Um, it allows you to organize your violence um, with certain rules, that you don't step beyond certain boundaries. And Cleopatra removing herself with her wealth, but and thus not paying her debt, is dishonorable and set up as such. So Yeah. And anything you want to add to that from this definition?
Yeah, just this idea you brought up gangsters, and so I just keep thinking of The
Mm.
Godfather. You
The Romans
know,
make the best fucking gangsters, of course,
they
right? Yeah.
they do, but yeah, you're right. This concept of honor and what is honorable somewhat provides a kind of a scaffold or a framework for the game,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And without it, it could be something of an anarchy, sort of a violent free for all,
Hmm.
without this sort of guiding concept that everybody is so invested in maintaining and keeping for themselves and
Yeah.
displaying for
Yeah.
others to see.
So, you know what, and we may name the episode this, but I like thinking of honor as a trap. It's a trap that's set by the patriarchy for competing patriarchs. It's a trap set for anyone who's trying to disrupt patriarchal hoarding and power plays. It's a trap particularly for women and girls because they cannot play by the games of patriarchal honor because they're not a part of they're not players with professions in the ideological, economic, military, or political world, if we use a Michael Mann rubric, right? They don't get to have that say. Now, even Cleopatra, who is in charge of the ideology, economics, military, and political goings on of Egypt, is is somehow made dishonorable with this trap. So even if you are able to be an elite woman who intersectionally gains this position of power, she can still fall into it and then we just assume she committed suicide. We assume that the story that we're told is true, and that's what we're unraveling here.
Yeah, so again, Antony commits suicide, honorable.
Mm-hmm.
Cleopatra does the same thing, and it's dishonorable. It
Mm-hmm.
would there have been a way for her to exit honorably? Like, certainly not through suicide, right? Just because of the very point that you just made. As a woman, she wouldn't have had access to be able to do that, right?
Right.
To take that honor to herself in the way that Antony did.
Well, and let me hit an important point here that you're bringing up, which is that many people listening to this will be like, well, why is Cleopatra's suicide dishonorable? I don't understand what you're saying. And this is where we get to perception of a woman committing suicide versus a man that we barely touch upon, that we don't talk about, but it's just there haunting the discourse. And the perception of a woman committing suicide is of a mother abandoning her children, of a queen abandoning her people, of a selfish woman who's so self involved that she can't be walked in the triumph, that she's willing to just let let everyone walk all over these innocents and let her son be hunted down and killed, let her other son be murdered in ways that are much more shadowy. But that it's like let's rip something from the headlines. You know, let's take the in the United States we read every day about a patriarch, small time patriarch, but still a leader of his family, his wife, his children, and then killing himself. And the perception of that versus the mother doing the same to herself and her children, and she usually is not able to murder the husband, just herself, is very different. I would argue in the media, the way it's presented, the way we feel about it, we understand that when the patriarch does that, we're like, oh, he was in a fit of despondency. She was trying to leave him, and thus he decided to take her and take himself. And this is all too common a story, right? When the woman does this, it's it's not despondency and grief and fear of loss. It's extraordinary hysteria, mental illness, um, a mother who's abandoned the idea of what motherhood even is, and it's presented in that way. So I think that we also need to realize that the way Cleopatra's suicide, as a suicide, is represented for a woman is very different than the way it would be for a man, and that the Romans knew that it would be perceived in that way. What do you think of that?
Yeah, it's the ultimate illustration of why a woman can't be trusted. She's gonna tap out at the exact moment that you need her. Also, this idea of women can just take themselves out, that's very dangerous to patriarchal society, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Because you need them around in order to serve these roles that they're playing. But something else I was thinking about when you were talking is a lot of times as well, when a man commits suicide or murder suicide in today's society, it's blamed on society in some way. Society failed this person,
Hmm.
this man, and oh, don't we feel sorry for him?
Yeah.
And how beaten down and how difficult and what a struggle his life must have been.
Unless, of course, it's a man of color, and then in the United States, and then he's degraded in some way. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So it just depends on the demographics of who you're talking about, what kind of culture and society that they're living in.
Right.
But either way, it's a great illustration of how this concept of honor as an ideology just isn't something that everyone has equal access to in any way.
I just thought of something that the way we treat abortion via the sexes is also similar, such that when a woman has an abortion, she is presented as someone who is lacking morality, who is doing an evil deed, who is killing her unborn child.
Putting
When,
herself
however,
first.
yes, putting herself first. Exactly. She's selfish. She wants to have a life. Who does she think she is? Her body should be for this baby, right? But when it's found out that a man has paid for an abortion of a woman he's not married to, a mistress, something like that, it's usually thought of in terms of patriarchal honor. People say, oh, yeah, I shouldn't have done that. But you don't have the same immorality connected to it. There's not the same murder of his child. It's a dishonorable thing to have a baby out of wedlock. It's a dishonorable thing to disrespect his wife and family in that way. So paying for that abortion is completely understood. So you can have the same act performed by two people, one male, one female, but because it's her body, the honorable thing, it's honorable for him, but completely immoral and even considered an act of murder for her. So I think we should think of Cleopatra in that way. And this suicide, this taking of a life, not as an unborn child, but of oneself in that very similar way.
You're starting to touch on something. I don't know if you want to talk about it now or if we want to push it a little bit, but this idea of honor and bodies.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's read the other David Graeber quote, and then let's go to that because I think you're right. We're going to want to jump into that. So we this quote helps me to understand how we apply patriarchal ideals to women and how it demonizes them in so doing. So this is on pages 170 and 171 of his book Debt, and I shall read, quote, "It seems to me that this is precisely what gives honor its notoriously fragile quality. Men of honor tend to combine a sense of total ease and self-assurance, which comes with the habit of command, with a notorious jumpiness, a heightened sensitivity to slights and insults, the feeling that a man, and it is almost always a man, is somehow reduced, humiliated, if any debt of honor is allowed to go unpaid. This is because honor is not the same as dignity. One might even say honor is surplus dignity. It is that heightened consciousness of power and its dangers that comes from having stripped away the power and dignity of others, or at the very least, from the knowledge that one is capable of doing so. At its simplest, honor is that excess dignity that must be defended with the knife or sword. Violent men, as we all know, are almost invariably obsessed with honor. Hence the warrior's ethos, where almost anything that could possibly be seen as a sign of disrespect, an inappropriate word, an inappropriate glance, is considered a challenge or can be treated as such. Yet even where overt violence has largely been put out of the picture, wherever honor is at issue, it comes with a sense that dignity can be lost and therefore must be constantly defended." Yeah.
Yeah,
God,
there's a
that's
lot in there.
and it sums up today's politics like perfectly.
Oh, for sure.
Um, it's rather scary the amount of umbrage and outrage that people say certain things about one and the kinds of things that would make a politician uh, upset and speak out to defend their honor. It's yeah, it's pretty extraordinary. Um, So yeah, this it's a fragile thing. It's a thing. It's the warrior's ethos. So why can't a person with a woman's body, right? And we understand, and I'll just say this out here, this podcast is not a turf podcast. We understand that bodies, that sexuality is a gradient in the human species and Homo sapiens sapiens, that if we did sexuality tests, we would not get a binary male or female answer. It would be a very complicated answer within our genetic makeup. But patriarchy works in the binary. So we're going to be discussing it from that perspective. So those bodies, according to patriarchs, that can be exploited, impregnated, penetrated, controlled, they don't get to participate arguably in this patriarchal ideal of honor, that when they do, it ends up demonizing them unless they play it very carefully. We could compare a Boudica or a Zenobia to a Cleopatra, and note how she is dishonorable, whereas those women were much more able to keep their honor. And they have the same body. So I don't think it's just having a female body. I think it's what you do with it, right? It's how you go out, how you remove yourself. Zenobia, of course, was displayed in triumph. But what do you think?
I think that you're getting close to the point that you were making in When Women Rule the World. In other words, these female bodies are okay with the concept of honor as long as they're exhibiting it in a way that is in line with the way the patriarchy wants them to behave.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not, then it becomes dishonorable.
And so if you have to act the way the patriarchy wants you to behave, then you have to be like a man. Um,
Right,
remove,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah, remove lovers, remove lineage, remove sexual activity. I think one of the things which is so strange because that's how the patriarchy replicates itself, right? What Cleopatra was doing was the closest in terms of her bodily engagement with the game of power to what a man would do. She didn't get married to Julius Caesar or Mark Antony. She used both of them as lovers, as sperm donors, as men in her harem, if you like, though sequentially, and had children with each of them and created a lineage that she could then use to populate different parts of a growing empire. And it was arguably when she did that Octavian sits up and goes, wait, no, I shall now go to the Senate, declare you an immoral witch and a destroyer of good Roman men, and I will now declare war on you. And that's what starts off the road to the Battle of Actium and their doom, right? But it's the fact that she's acting more like a man that threatens that patriarchy, all of those children, all of that potential offspring, and even the open threat that her son Ptolemy the 15th is the true heir of Julius Caesar, if we think of this as a kingship, right? um and we all know, of course, that Mark Antony's will, he had it read, publicly, and apparently Mark Antony said that Ptolemy the 15th Caesarion was the true heir of Julius Caesar, which Octavian presented as an affront to his honor, and thus a need to go and behave violently with these people. So it's a trap for a woman. She can't behave like a man, and she can't behave like a woman. So what's somebody like Zenobia or Boudica to do? They're meant to be a woman past childbearing age who doesn't take on a lover, who just fights as a warrior, and has no sex and no procreation, and that's the easier way to go about it. But then you're not going to have any longevity.
Yeah, yeah. So I completely understand what you're saying here, but I'm also trying to reconcile what a woman can do. What kind of honor does she have access to, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's definitely a concept of an honorable woman in
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
patriarchal society.
Mm-hmm.
But in thinking about it, it seems to me a different kind of honor. There's what you might call the economy of honor, or something that is a more male-centric way of operating with honor. And
Mm-hmm.
then there's something different for women because they do have access to honor, but it's gained differently, it's spent differently, that kind of capital, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if honor is about debt, and we, I think of Friedel. What's her first name? Um, Elspeth Friedel, so, the anthropologist who looked at all of the different hunter gatherers, and
Yeah, I'm
and
sorry, it's escaping me.
no, me too. Um, it's okay, but it's Friedl, and it's all of the different hunter gatherers that she was able to connect with, and the scarce resources brought into the community, and how much power women had in a given hunter-gatherer society. It was always connected to the scarce resources they brought in. So if you're in the Inuit hunter-gatherer community, women brought in none of the scarce resources. A pregnant, breastfeeding, menstruating, and or menstruating woman could not go on the rickety whaleskin boat for months at a time to go on the big whale hunt, and so was left at home and was made to, in her community, had no power, was not a part of an elders council, and was actually treated quite poorly. I think it's Elsbeth. Oh my goodness. Ernestine. Got it. Ernestine. Sorry. Ernestine Friedel. But if you compare that to the Tonga or the Chumash people of Southern California, but she mentions the Tongva in particular, where your scarce resources are fished from a river, and a woman who's got a baby on her back, who's breastfeeding, who's menstruating or pregnant, is able to catch just about as many fish as the guy next to her, even with all of that reproductive labor. She has a seat in the elders council. It's like a 45 to 55% amongst the Tongva. And so in many ways, I think it depends on where your scarce resources come from in society. In patriarchal society, whether that's pastoral domestication of animals, you move from place to place, but you own your sheep and goat, or it's an agricultural domesticated society and you're farming, women are not bringing in the scarce resources. The man is perceived as bringing in the scarce resources, and the women are bound to husbands in legal um, uh, arrangements. And if they break out of those legal arrangements, we have the same double double standard, right? Just like abortion. The woman who, just look at Leviticus, just look at the law code of Hammurabi. A woman who strays from her marriage is so dishonorable that she can be murdered, can be killed with all the honor that demands, right? It must be done to maintain honor. Whereas a man who strays outside of his marriage might have to take on a second wife or pay a debt or something, right? So the you can see that within patriarchy, it's very much about money. It's very much about debts.
There's
It's
yeah,
brutal.
yes,
Yes.
there's all of that. There is
Yeah.
that aspect to it, absolutely. But what I'm also thinking about is that this idea of honor, as we discussed earlier, as honoring a debt or evening the scales, paying it
Mm-hmm.
off. So for men, honor is in a way a right to that compensation, right? A
Right.
right to be able to even the score a
Right.
little bit. Whereas for women, certain aspects of being an honorable woman, quote unquote, in a patriarchal society is it is honorable for women to forego that compensation, to completely give it up, to not ask for it, to not want it. That is honorable for women,
Right.
right? To
Right.
give
Right.
of your body, your time, your labor, and that is honorable.
I have the
To
word
not be
submission.
compensated to
I
that.
have the word submission written down, right? Yeah.
Submission, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, to just release it, to not expect it, to not fight for it, to not attempt to gain for yourself or to pull anything to yourself.
But
Did,
that
do you see what
means
I'm saying? Is
I
like it's a
do.
different side of the same coin.
So the grand conclusion of this discussion is that the woman or girl she is born into a patriarchy as debt, with debt. She has the sins of Eve. She is there spending her whole life, and never will, but she's spending her whole life paying off the debt of the scarce resources being given to her, the debt of the home that is put over her head, the roof that's over your head. Like, think of when a man beats his wife or mistreats his wife or reminds his wife of her place. I brought in all these resources. I make this paycheck. I do this for you. You have to give me love, care, whatever. So the patriarchy, then the way it sets it up is that anybody who is in charge then ideologically manufactures debt for those who are under his control, from whom he parasitically exploits. But how brilliant ideologically that it's set up as a debt to be repaid.
Yeah, and you don't actively engage that debt. You just exist
Yeah.
within this system. And your, by virtue of your status, whether that's because of gender, race, ethnicity, whatever, you just possess that debt.
You pay it off with your very body, with the babies you produce, with the labor you perform, with the caretaking you give, and the love and care that you give. That your body is a performance of debt payment that will never be repaid. So that if we return to Cleopatra, then when her suicide is presented in and performatively presented in this propaganda, it's that she's, by taking herself out and not allowing herself to be put into the triumph, she has not paid off her debt. She has not submitted. She's not. This is the story that's being told, right? I still think he's murdered her, right, or ordered her to be murdered, whatever it is. But the story that's being told is that she's removed herself from the game and thus is not submitted to allowing her body to pay off the debt as she should.
Yeah, or to continue to serve her people, or however you want to look at it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And her daughters are given places of honor to live despite, we might say, their mother's dishonorable removal of herself. And one becomes queen of Numidia, and this is a different discussion that one can follow down. But it's yeah, it's a super interesting topic.
It's a fascinating discussion, but
Yeah,
very convoluted in many
yeah.
ways, just because I think it just that's the nature. It doesn't make sense. It's not
Like,
supposed to. It's
well,
just
because
supposed to serve.
ideology doesn't make sense, and when you've
Right.
been steeped in it being morality, then
Mm-hmm.
you can hardly see it. You can hardly see how this actually works and how it might work for Cleopatra. But I do think that applying anti-patriarchal thinking to history as it is told to us is essential. It's essential, or you're not going to be able to see anything. You'll just believe what Plutarch tells you, what Livy tells you. It'll all just be accepted as fact. Oh, Octavian did this, and then this guy did that, and she did this, and that's why. And if you don't apply some sort of anti-patriarchal thought, we are nowhere. Are we confused by it still? Yeah. Yeah. Because
Yes.
you and I, we're still living honorable lives in our ways, that we consider honorable. Um, and it's not that women don't, it's part of anti-patriarchy now, or women having joined the workforce. We also need to keep our word. We also need to pay off our debts. We also need to be a part of this, but we don't do so in a violent thug-like manner, but we still do it. So how do you create a post-patriarchal sense of honor, or morality? And that's something I think society is dealing with every day right now.
Yeah, and how can you do it if you still essentially have all of that patriarchal framework? Just
Yeah.
thinking of Graeber's work itself, he wrote a lot about economies and
Yeah.
such, and he very much questioned that typical capitalist, patriarchal type of economy. And I think that that's why he was able to get at this concept and to just bring it up as, look at this,
Mm-hmm.
and just try to at least question debt in societies.
Right. And then it makes sense when you look back at Hatshepsut and you're like, oh, no wonder she had to masculinize. That was her way of manufacturing honor as a man rather than a woman. And if Nefertiti, and I do believe she did, was a leader of Egypt as co-king and then sole king, as Ankh-Khepru, then she had to masculinize and rename herself so much that we can hardly see her as Nefertiti as was. She had to become something different. And that it really is the burden placed on the woman that to be a leader within the man's world, she has to become that which is controlling her, that which is parasitically exploiting her, but then she has to somehow become that and yet not become that. And good luck to you.
Yeah.
It's white
When
feminism right
women,
there, right?
right,
Yeah.
when women get access to that more male formula of honor, it is when they put themselves into that mold, that framework, and operate within those very strict parameters. So yeah, this is like I said, it's a fascinating discussion, and I just don't like I don't see the end of it. You
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
go round and round with it
Yeah.
and put it in the context of different cultures, different times,
Yeah.
and you get a completely different discussion in many ways.
Well, I shall put an end to it. And the end, this shall be the end. But I'm so grateful that you're able to come and talk to me about this topic because it's something I've been thinking about for a while, and to actually be able to discuss it and see where it went. That was really fun. I hope you guys enjoyed it too. And if you did, do make sure that you check us out on Substack. Just put in my name, Kara Cooney, or you can find us under Ancient Now. Um, and that's where Afterlives of Ancient Egypt lives. And we also do written pieces that accompany the podcast there. If you're listening to us on Apple or Spotify, just make sure you like and follow, like and subscribe, all of those things. It helps us out a lot. And we are completely free. All of our data and information and writing and podcasts are available for everyone to read and hear all the time. So given that, if you could be a paid subscriber, we would really appreciate it. It would help to pay Jordan and Amber. I receive no recompense from these endeavors. That would be great. And if you do become a paid subscriber, then you get to be a part of our quarterly meetings and our chat on the Substack, which is pretty fun. And I just put some video of us making wine from the Merlot grapes in our backyard that are growing on the side of the garage. And you can see my son smashing grapes with a potato masher, which is pretty cool. So get onto Substack, join that, and you can follow the conversation there.
Yes, please follow, subscribe, share with a friend.
Share with a friend, all of those things. So thanks for helping us to make this academic work reach the public. It's what we love to do. And till next time on this podcast called
Afterlives of Ancient Egypt.
Oh, you got it this time. Good job. Take care, you guys. Bye. Thank you to our listeners for your support, and please subscribe. If you enjoyed the show, share it with all your friends, and most importantly, leave us a 5-star review. Send all those ancient world questions and topic suggestions for future episodes to ancientnow@substack.com. We actually do read them all. You can find info on all my books, articles, and upcoming lectures on my website. Just head to karacooneyegyptologist.com. Amber puts all of that together. Oh my God, thank you, Amber. Check out our Substack Ancient Now at ancientnow.substack.com, where we share perspectives on all that history and archaeology news every week and continue the conversations that happen after the podcast mic is turned off. Support the show by becoming a paid subscriber at our Substack Ancient Now community. This keeps the show free for everyone, and paid status gives you access to our archives. Thank you to our current supporters. I'm at all the social medias. Look for @Kara-Cooney. Thanks to the team at Patina Productions for this podcast, which I must point out is wholly separate from my academic work at UCLA. See you next time on Afterlives of Ancient Egypt.